Hello and welcome to The Menu, Monocle Radio's food and drink programme. I'm your host, Chiara Rimella. Coming up, we are dedicating this episode to the food of Ukraine, be it inside the country or out, and how it can function as celebration or symbol of resilience. First, we speak to a Ukrainian chef in Sydney about her latest book, Sour Cherries and Sunflowers.
And I was trying to uncover, what's beyond Soviet dishes? What is actually from this region of Belarus, or what is actually from this region of Ukraine?
Next, we hear from a reporter exploring the role of bread in the Ukrainian psyche.
Even in really difficult places like Kherson, a lady rushed up to us and gave us a jar of pickles to take away. And, I couldn't believe it. She hardly had anything and the place is a nightmare to live in.
Plus, we head to one of New York's most long-standing Ukrainian restaurants. All that here in The Menu on Monocle Radio. Food is a powerful signifier of heritage, and for many of those who live far away from their homeland, a link to their memories and upbringing. Many Ukrainians have had to leave their country even before Russia's full-scale invasion began. Anastasia Zolotarev's family relocated from Belarus to Ukraine and later to Australia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Some ingredients have become key in providing a connection to her past and have provided inspiration for the title of her latest book, Sour Cherries and Sunflowers. In it, Anastasia celebrated the distinct flavours of Eastern European cuisine across both Ukraine and Belarus. Earlier, I spoke to her to find out more.
These two ingredients, for me, when I think back to where I'm from, it's always, the food memories always come back to me. So when creating this book, I just felt that sour cherries and sunflowers were two really inspiring memories and connections that I've had with Ukraine and with Belarus, because those are not two things that you can easily find where I am now, because we moved so far away. I live in Sydney, and you couldn't find sour cherries on a tree growing in the backyard here in Sydney. And you couldn't really find unrefined sunflower oil, this beautiful toasted sunflower oil that you can find in Ukraine on the streets. People from their own personal harvest, they sell in front of their house occasionally. So those are the sour cherries. They bring me back to my Belarusian heritage and the towns, the villages, the streets that are just full of sour cherry trees in the summer, and sunflowers and sunflower oil and everything to do with their taste. They bring me back to Ukraine.
I think it's interesting that in the book you obviously reference your mum and your babushka, but then you sort of go beyond that. We're quite used to referencing our grandmothers in the kitchen, but you go beyond that and go straight to the ancestors. I think it's interesting because what does that mean for you in terms of the way that you understand your cooking? How deeply do you think about tradition when you're cooking?
I think that food and recipes is one of those things. It's one of the rare things that is passed down that you can sort of connect with people from the past in your family. So, for example, some of these recipes like the honey cake and also the fried hand pies, the recipes for those are actually passed down from my ancestors. So my babushka, my Ukrainian babushka, saved those recipes. They actually come from her babushka, her mum. And so it's several generations. And that's, I guess, why I reference them, is because several of the recipes in here, they've sort of continued on. And something that I want to continue is that connection through food with them.
It's a common story, that of people who are distant from a homeland and kind of hark back to it via the medium of food. I wonder, how much do you have actual memories of the food being cooked in Ukraine or Belarus growing up, and how much of it is sort of the version of it that you grew to know when you were growing up in Australia through your family? And I suppose how much that Australian influence has also shaped the way that you look at these. Have they remained kind of totemic in their connection to the homeland, or has Australia kind of seeped in somehow as well?
Yeah, so a bit of both. I feel like there are some recipes that just haven't changed in the slightest. The only thing that has changed is the location where we cook and eat them. And then there are some recipes that have slightly adjusted and been changed just because we are in Australia and you can't go to a local bazaar and buy one out of, 100 curd cheeses that you can just help yourself to. You have to make that at home. So we've sort of started to make those ingredients at home that are hard to access. But I feel that because of the nostalgia, the food has always felt distant yet close at the same time. So the recipes, the memories, they felt distant yet completely close, because when we cook something like potato vareniki, we are immediately grounded and feel like we can be, within any four walls of a house, and we could be anywhere, because like for the minute that you put that vareniki, the dumpling, in your mouth, you are transported back. And I feel like it's an instant connection, and it almost reminds you of so many deep down memories that are just within you.
In the book, you say, even when you're not necessarily trying to make food political, it's difficult for it not to be political at all. I think particularly in a context like Ukraine right now. How important do you think maintaining, cooking this food and looking at its histories is also in defining a sense of identity and of pride in one's identity? There are a lot of complicated histories in the recipes that have ended up in this book. And I suppose, how do you untangle all of that?
It was such a process thinking about that when I was creating and writing this book. And I felt like each recipe, each dish has so much story to tell in itself, and so many people, I feel like, from that part of the world could talk a lot about a certain dish, because it does carry a load of history or connection to culture. And there's so many dishes that, you look at any food culture, it's dependent on resources, environment, politics. They're completely intertwined. You can't separate them. And yeah, writing this book was tricky. I removed some recipes because I felt that they were not appropriate anymore, which was interesting. And I just felt that in my stomach, like in my gut, I just felt like, I don't feel comfortable about that recipe anymore, because it actually it reflects a time that wasn't really great for many people. And so, yeah, it was a process. And it's interesting. Like, I look back at some of them, and they certainly remind me of certain times as well in our culture and our history.
I think it's also really interesting to look at the specificity of national cultures, because the book is your recipes from Eastern Europe and beyond. But you mentioned specifically Ukraine and Belarus, and I was wondering whether you could give us a bit of a sense of, for example, what are like the inherently Belarusian recipes in here? Because I think that frequently it's easy to sort of paint something with a broad brush and saying, it's Eastern European cooking. And there certainly are, as the book quite eloquently proves, so many meeting points across the region. But also, where are the specificities that perhaps have not been appreciated as much until now?
Yeah, so I think like one of the things that helped me understand that, because when I did start this book, my eyes completely opened to that. When I went to Belarus and to Ukraine, we drove a lot, because I went back to research, to shoot some things, photograph. And I was sitting down with people and constantly asking the question, and I was trying to uncover, okay, what's beyond Soviet dishes? What is actually from this region of Belarus, or what is actually from this region of Ukraine? And so I was constantly thinking about those things. And for example, with Belarus, a lot of the food it's similar to Ukraine in the sense that a complete connection to food and cooking and its ingredients and its seasonality. So everything has a time and place, like mushrooms. There's certain mushrooms come out in different seasons, how they're preserved, how they're used at different times of the year and the season. But for example, with Belarus in specifically, it's a very potato, very mushroomy, very wild sort of cooking, using those sort of ingredients. And things like potato babka or mushroom babka, for me, that's what I think of and what I would say are the national dishes of Belarusian cooking. Very influenced by forest and water, because there's so many lakes and rivers. And Ukraine, on the other hand, the landscape is so varied, and there are influences from the south, which is more like tomatoes and warmth and heat, and influences from the west, southwest as well, which again, it's polenta and wild honey, and just certain environmental landscape influences that I feel like define the food regionally.
There are some ingredients that are just so evocative, and you list some of them in your sort of ideal Eastern European pantry at the beginning of the book. I wonder, if we were whizzing around a Eastern European deli together, What would you reach for on the shelves that would make sure that we have all of the staples in place at home to sort of get our way around many of these recipes or kind of get cooking in this style? Like, what are we picking up?
So I would find a really beautiful unrefined golden sunflower oil as close as possible to what you would find in Ukraine. So it's really like dark in color and it's got this beautiful toasted smell. And you could drizzle that on top of anything and that'll just make the dish incredible. So for example, just with fresh tomatoes, then a sauerkraut, a really nice sauerkraut, like something like cabbage, carrot, a little bit of caraway seed is fine. Because sauerkraut you can use in cooking. So there's a few recipes in the book where I add it into fillings for a pie, it just makes it tangy but sweet. In the fried pirashki as well, it's tangy but sweet and it just adds this beautiful flavor to it all. And then also like a red pepper paste, a jika, which is something that in my family we've cooked so much and we make it so much because babushka, my Ukrainian babushka, she was always traveling through the Caucasus and through Georgia, and that's sort of where she would go with my grandfather on holiday, and they would hike and explore the country, and she was really influenced by those flavors. So that sort of became a traditional recipe in our family. And then that's really beautiful to add into soups and stews like borscht and so on. So you just kind of like add a bit of beautiful flavor with those sort of ingredients and staples. And then also buckwheat, of course. Buckwheat is just such a staple, but it has to be the toasted buckwheat, not the raw buckwheat. So something that is available in most Eastern European delis is, really good toasted buckwheat, which you can even then double toast it and or even put in the oven to intensify it even more, as my auntie does sometimes.
How have you seen the sort of reputation of Eastern European food change internationally? Because you're also seeing it from the Australian point of view. So do you think that people have changed their opinions, appreciated it more, go out and seek it out and, will go to the restaurant to try it out?
Now, yes. In the last few years, yes. I mean, Polish food has always been popular, and I feel like Polish food itself has always spread and kind of everybody was more aware of that, but definitely not specific Ukrainian or Belarusian and also their surrounding countries. Lithuanian food isn't really well known. Latvian food is not really well known. But when you travel to those countries, there are so many differences. And I think that with this book, I'm hoping to introduce it a little bit more to Australia, because I feel that in the UK, there has already been a good decade of it being introduced by Olya Hercules, who is an incredible visionary, incredible chef. And I think that her book was one of the first books to be able to do that in the Western world, I would say. And over the last decade, it's slowly becoming more and more open and known, and I feel like people are learning that there's more than just borscht or the dumplings to the cuisine. And it'd be incredible if we get to a place where it's just as well known as like Italian and we know so many dishes of Italian cooking. So that would be incredible.
That was Anastasia Zolotarev. This is The Menu. Another specialty that holds a very important place in Ukrainians' memories and mind is bread. Other than, of course, being a staple on everyday tables, it has taken on a symbolic significance ever since Moscow's invasion, in particular the sourdough palyanitsia, given its name pronunciation being a telltale signifier of whether the speaker is from Ukraine or Russia. British journalist Felicity Spector reported on the collapse of the communist bloc and has travelled to Ukraine many times over the years, including when the country first declared independence. Now she has decided to combine her skills in current affairs and food writing into her latest book, Bread and War. In the book, she delves deep into the significance of this building block of cuisine and how it's intrinsically linked to ideas of resilience and strength. Here, Felicity sits down with Monocle's Julia Lazica to tell her more.
I mean, bread is really important on the Ukrainian table. If you look back at Ukrainian history and tradition, there's a lot of Ukrainian breads that are very much linked to different festivals like Christmas and Easter and so on. There's always a special bread. And palyanitsa, which is the iconic Ukrainian sourdough, even the word itself became really symbolic. During the start of the full-scale invasion, when Russian soldiers were literally sort of miles from Kyiv, there were loads of roadblocks around, and sometimes when people stopped someone who looked suspicious, they would ask them to say the word palyanitsa because apparently Russians can't pronounce it. So this was a very iconic word in itself for the Ukrainians. And it's also something which really symbolises community and hospitality. You break bread, you have bread with somebody. One of our baker friends who travels with us a lot, who help at the mobile bakery, said that the word companion comes from the Latin compane, which means with bread.
And one question I really wanted to introduce our listeners into types of bread or types of dishes that you've been exposed to in your work in Ukraine at the mobile bakeries, but also going to people's homes, being invited in. Just sort of what are the highlights that our listeners can hear about?
I mean, so we have a mobile bakery which the charity Bake for Ukraine bought. We did the fundraising here, and it's still working away in Mykolaiv. And they make this palyanitsa bread on board, and also a really delicious rye bread, because the quality of Ukrainian wheat and rye and barley and all the other grains is really, really high. Very nutritious. It's all locally grown. We try to get our wheat from a local organic wheat grower in the Odessa region. But everybody there is so hospitable. It's absolutely amazing. If you go to someone's house for a cup of tea, then suddenly they lay the entire table with food. Ukrainians like to eat a kind of pork fat called salo. I'm Jewish, obviously I don't eat that. But they then, oh my gosh, there'll be nothing for you to eat. There's a table full of food. I mean, they have pickles, they have different cheeses like brinza. They make these delicious little pancakes, which is my favourite food, called syrniki. It's made of curd cheese, sometimes with raisins, which I always like. And it's served usually with some jam or fruit compote. You can get it on breakfast menus everywhere. People always have jars of fermented foods that they keep, especially if they have a small allotment. A lot of people who live in the country will have a big garden behind where they live, and they'll make pickled cabbage, pickled cucumbers, tomatoes, apple, plums. I mean, it's amazing. Absolutely delicious.
Yeah. And well, there's so many things to unpack there. But one of the things that I think people have been sort of waking up to is actually what we in Western Europe can learn from Ukrainians. So at the end of the book, you talk about if there was a sort of shutdown in shops here, etc., we'd sort of run out of food pretty quickly, whereas in Ukraine there's this resilience because there's this abundance of food always being sold. But also, I mean, just in the cuisine and the techniques that we're using and the ingredients that are being mixed together, what are the sort of big lessons that maybe you have brought back, or that maybe you encourage chefs even to go to Ukraine to learn about Ukrainian attitudes to food and cooking?
I mean, there's a very, very zero waste culture, and that's partly because of the Holodomor, the famine in the 1930s that was induced by Stalin. So many people starved to death, and so there's a huge sort of cultural heritage, I suppose, of saving food and treating it as a precious resource. So you give someone some bread, they're not going to throw it away, they're going to use it, and they're going to keep it. And so that's why we make sourdough, because it keeps really well. And also, yes, I was talking to Yevhen Klopotenko, who's a well-known chef in Kyiv, and he said, imagine if all the shops in England closed down for weeks and there was nothing on sale, people would go absolutely crazy. Whereas in Ukraine, because under the Soviet system, nobody trusted the authorities to deliver anything, they were used to having their own resources, and people are very resourceful. I met this guy who was living in a basement under shelling for months in Izium in Kharkiv region. He could make candles out of potatoes. And they just managed to make bread out of some flour and a bit of water and whatever they could find. And people were heating up food over candles and things when there was no power. And they just kind of make the best of what they've got. And these techniques of fermentation and pickling, it means that you can preserve the fruit that you get in summer for, months till the next, to the next year. So when you're living through winter and so on and there aren't fresh vegetables, you've got all that. It's very, very good for you. Keeps for ages. They make beautiful juices out of the liquid. There's a drink called uzvar, which is made from the liquid left over from cooking dried fruit. There's a lot of dried prunes and apricots and things that you can get. They're always slightly savoury. They're almost smoked. So this drink isn't too sweet, and it's very nutritious because it's got all that vitamins that you get from left over from cooking the fruit. So things like that, it's zero waste, but it's nothing that they only just picked up from some trend. It's stuff which their grandmothers learned and have passed on.
Yeah. And your experience specifically, you talk about going to Ukraine giving you this purpose that you were looking for, and that, you wanted to go to Ukraine for so many sort of decades of your working experience, but you were in Moscow and then you sort of were moving around, but you never quite made it to Ukraine. Can you tell me about what drew you to Ukraine in the first place, and now what keeps you sort of tethered and going back to the country?
So originally, my late father, my parents passed away about 10 years ago. My dad's parents came from Dnipro, which was then called Yekaterinoslav, about over 100 years ago. I never knew them because they passed away before I was born. But I always had this kind of great passion to learn about, well, then it was the former Soviet Union when I was younger, and I used to go a lot. But I never quite, we went once just inside Ukraine in 1991 when they declared independence. And I have other relatives who lived in Kyiv for a while, and I kept meaning to go. And so it almost felt like, all right, this is the time to go. And I had this opportunity to help a bakery, which is when I first started going, and I organised a convoy to take equipment. Their warehouse had been bombed, so they'd lost all their resources and, spare ingredients and everything. And it's one of those countries which, I don't know, you just meet such amazing people. I made really, really good friends. And when I started working with the girls from Bake for Ukraine, it's like having a second family. It really is. People are so generous and welcoming, considering what terrible conditions and stress and fatigue and everything. It's really, really tough, especially in somewhere like Odessa or Kharkiv, where there is a lot of bombing. At night, it's super disruptive. Like every night, you're probably not going to sleep through to the morning. And it's not just that you wake up and go back to sleep immediately. And people worry about the relations who are fighting on the front line, or they themselves get mobilised. Quite a few of our bakers are now fighting in the armed forces of Ukraine. So you feel then very invested in their safety and in sort of thinking of them and trying to support their families and relations through the really difficult times.
Yeah. And finally, the book ends with recipes, which is almost a surprise because it sort of reads a sort of memoir, and there's history in there, and there's politics and culture and everything. It's a great read. But then you end with these recipes. I wanted to ask what you were thinking of when you gave that to your readers. What did you want them to take away from that book? And did it sort of bring it to life more, do you think, for the readers as well?
I love Ukrainian food. I really enjoy it. It's one of the, I can't wait to get back there. And even in really difficult places like Kherson, a lady rushed up to us and gave us a jar of pickles to take away. And, I couldn't believe it. She hardly had anything, and the place is a nightmare to live in. And then these syrniki, I really feel like an ambassador for them. I want people to make them and enjoy them and sort of realise that it's like having cheesecake for breakfast, what's not to love. And I think by making the food, it's like a gateway into the culture, and it's something which you can then share with other people. There are fantastic cooks like Olia Hercules, she's really done more than anyone else to popularise Ukrainian food and recipes. And I think that spreading that knowledge and helping people to understand, the flavours and some of the techniques and stuff that they use. It's nothing complicated. It's always things you can make, in your kitchen with one bowl or something. It's simple, but it's got complex flavours. And I really hope that people will then want to learn more about Ukrainian culture and other traditions.
That was Felicity Spector in conversation with Julia Lassica. This is The Menu. Now it's time for the week's top food and drink headlines. Here is Monocle's Francesca Gilks.
Earlier this week, Japan's Minister for Agriculture resigned after saying he never buys rice because he gets given it for free. The incendiary remark comes amid a national rice shortage in Japan and soaring food prices. Erasuriz' Wine Photographer of the Year award for 2025 has been revealed. The coveted prize, which is part of the annual World Food Photography Awards, was awarded to the American photographer Heather Deinitz. The winning shot, Pinot Noir at Midnight, depicts a worker loading grapes into a tractor against the backdrop of Santa Barbara's night sky. Strawberry growers in the UK have said that the sunny spring weather has delivered a crop of berries as big as plums or kiwi fruits. The bountiful harvest is a result of unusually low light levels during the winter months, followed by the brightest spring since 1910. Farmers have said that this year's berries are 20% bigger on average than last year's. And Eurochange have released the Aperol Spritz Index, showing which EU cities mix the best and worst value cocktails. In top spot is Naples, where the average spritz will only set you back £1.54. Sippers in Milan, meanwhile, can expect the same drink to cost an eye-watering £12.81. Those are the week's food and drink headlines. Now back to Chiara.
Thanks, Francesca. You're listening to The Menu. Some eateries are more than just restaurants. They are the beating hearts of a diaspora community in another country. Veselka is one of them. For over 7 decades, it has been serving Ukrainian food to New Yorkers from Manhattan's East Village. Established by a refugee from the Soviet Union shortly after World War II, it is currently run by his grandson, Jason Burchard. Since the Russian invasion, it has raised thousands of dollars for the war effort and been a haven for the Ukrainian community. A documentary film, Veselka, the rainbow on the corner of the centre of the world, telling its story, was released last year. Contributor Charlie Bell went to take a look.
It's a Thursday afternoon in East Village. Humid, place is full of students, raffle shops, bars, convenience stores. We're in the heart of what used to be known as Little Ukraine, where as many as 200,000 Ukrainians lived. We're here to visit Veselka, a restaurant that has been a beacon for Ukrainians. And I'm here to try some of the food and talk to its owner, his family who've been running this outpost of Ukrainian culture since 1954. There's an advert on the wall for Veselka, the rainbow in the corner at the centre of the world. The movie that's been made about the restaurant, its history and the extraordinary period of activism that's taken place here over the last 2 or 3 years when the war in Ukraine made this place a very special hub. Just been handed a menu, and as I wait and have a look, there's a stand with Ukraine bowl, Ukrainian dumplings. We've got potato, braised beef, sauerkraut, mushrooms, short rib, cheese, bacon, egg and cheese. Taste of Ukraine for $40. And here comes Jason.
Hey, Charlie. Nice to meet you.
How are you? Likewise. Jason Burchard has a bandana in the blue and yellow of Ukraine's flag stylishly tied around his neck. His glasses are equally sharp. His face is tense, but welcoming, as if carrying a lot of burden. He begins by talking about the film.
The documentary that was made shows the historical background of the family business. I'm third generation. We're going into our 71st year of business. It was started by my grandfather in 1954. The documentary highlights the historical background and then more, issues that we face running this business over the course of the last 70 years, whether it was 9/11, Superstorm Sandy, the pandemic, and now an unjust war. So I have a team of women in my Brooklyn location. We have built this kind of a large kitchen facility. They make approximately 6,000 of the handmade dumplings, the pierogi, but not only to supply here at 2nd Avenue, we have outposts in Grand Central Terminal, and we have a small space, a restaurant in Brooklyn. So
it's amazing. It's an amazing
6,000 to 7,000 a day, and that's a lot of pierogis.
Incredible. Some of the women making those dumplings are refugees from the war, the mothers of staff members who sought refuge here in New York. We're meeting the day before new peace talks between Russia and Ukraine.
Ukraine wants this unjust war to stop at whatever cost. I mean, they're not going to give up the land that Russia has occupied, but they do want to come to the table, to come to some resolution. And the fact that Putin is now blatantly as a no-show when he has had overtures that he'd like to do this as well, but Zelensky's there with his full staff awaiting, with hat in hands, as they say. But it's very sad representation of what Russia has demonstrated since the beginning of this war. But I don't want to get on a soapbox. We all need food for survival. This is not a white tablecloth restaurant. We're a very simple, family-oriented Ukrainian staple, which is comfort food. Our hashtag is Ukrainian soul food in the East Village. And what is soul food? Soul food is something that's made with love, and the ladies that work diligently to make the thousands of pierogis do it because they love doing it, and they love that people have an enjoyable experience, whether it's from the pierogis or the borscht, the hundreds or thousands of gallons of borscht that are made weekly. I mean, it's just it's a connection that Ukrainians love to share. Growing up as a child, my grandmother would make a full spread, and she would feel insulted if you walked away and didn't finish your plate, because she made it with with a lot of love, and she wanted to make sure that you enjoyed it and never go hungry. Ukraine went through a period in the 1930s of a famine of sorts, because you never know when another famine or war, as we're now dealing with, can happen. Food definitely connects people, and our classic, our potato, I'm going to say, and then we make a great short rib. So meat and potato, I mean, I hate to say that those are definitely staples.
As the war grinds on and compassion fatigue sets in, I ask how his staff are coping.
They're concerned about how the future is going to continue to play out. There's more uncertainty now than there was the day after the war started, especially with the politics involved. I think others are skeptical. The political hot potato with the funding that was happening last few years and then with the previous administration and finally getting approved, and how this war is playing out on the front lines, whether it's 20th century or 19th century warfare in trenches on the front line to 21st century drone warfare. Nobody knows, and anybody's a target, especially in the big cities of Kharkiv or Odessa and Kiev, where drone can hit your apartment building at any time. Thankfully, majority of the staff family or extended family has escaped those hot zones, but they're very concerned about their comrades and fellow countrymen, women, what the future holds. It's still very uncertain. So, but they're proud to come to work and continue to support each other, and I try to do the same and be understanding of their needs and wants.
In the film, there were very moving images of Jason's grandfather in the 1950s and 60s using Veselka as a gathering place for Ukrainians fighting Soviet domination. I asked Jason if he feels he's following in his footsteps.
When you bring it up, it definitely ignites the fire in me that I'm able to continue the dream. Him sitting around the table of his comrades and helping gather funds and keep the underground freedom train. At that point in the 50s and 60s and 70s, or it wasn't until 1990 that Ukraine became an independent, free, democratic state, that he was diligent working behind the scenes and, spreading the news and, making sure that the Ukrainian diaspora that was able to migrate or immigrate here to the tri-state area had a place to come. And, whether that's you're living in Ukraine or you're living in the U.S., you need to survive. And I think he would be very proud that as we are now, fighting for our lives, literally, in Ukraine, that we're doing our best to continue to raise awareness and raise monies and advocate diligently on his behalf or on Veselka's behalf and our family's behalf.
Jason is a very busy man. He leaves to continue his work. Time for borscht and pierogi.
Wow, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I ordered pierogies too, okay?
Oh, did you? Thank you. Very kind. So I've just been handed a small bowl of borscht. Wonderful colour. A sprinkle of herbs on top. Sour cream. Absolutely delicious. Rich, lovely, meaty. Oh, thank you. Sweet beetroot and delicious soft beans. Oh. So this is pierogi. These are pierogies, and what's this? This onions.
It's fried onions, sour cream, and usually they eat with sour cream and fried onions with the pierogies.
Thank you. So here we are. We've got the pierogies here, made with love. You can see the indentations around the pierogies, all handmade in the crescent shape. Putting a bit of onions and sour cream on top of it. I'm having a short rib one. Absolutely melts in the mouth. It slips down so swiftly. It's like eating a warm sort of bath. It's absolutely comforting and relaxing. I'm having the potato one, which is absolutely soft and unctuous. This is seriously good. So soft and comforting. It's lovely. Caramelised onions and sour cream and potato. Oh. Jason's office sits above the restaurant, and I'm trying to get his attention. Jason, thank you so much. It was so delicious. It's like a warm bath. Thank you. And as I leave, I walk past a wall of photographs that show this place's amazing history, from a candy store to what it is today. Pictures of Jason's grandfather standing proudly flanked by 2 dogs, and the generations of the family that have followed, smiling down. Generations of commitment to Ukrainian freedom.
Thanks, Charlie. And that's all for this edition of The Menu. Remember that we are back with a new episode again on Friday at 2000 London time. That's at midday in San Francisco. Also, don't forget to tune to our spin-off show Food Neighborhoods for a tour of some of the world's tastiest destinations. I am Kira Rimella. This program was produced by Monica Lillis, and our sound engineers were Flynn Simons and Elliot Greenfield. Thanks for listening, and until next week.